It's 4 o'clock in Radio Cairo. This is World of Info. We're coming live from Studio 3, FM 95.4 in the whole city of Cairo and around the whole of Egypt. It's a great pleasure to have you with us in the World of Info today. My name is Dr. Amr MABROuk. Dua Muhammad is at the control. And now is the time of our program, weekly program, which starts from 4 to 5 every Thursday. Stay tuned with us to more of Info. And today is the world of books. And yes, today is a hot summer day in Cairo, and nothing you can do better than having a book in your hands and relaxing anywhere in the whole city of Cairo or in Egypt, or if you have the chance by any way to be staying in front of the sea, whether this is the Mediterranean or the Red Sea, anywhere in Egypt is beautiful, and nothing better than to spend some time with the world of books. And yes, you know the rule of the game. We always give you a challenge. We tell you the name of 3 books that I have read in the past month. That's called July Reading More. And the answer for the question or the quiz is, should I read this book? Should I skim it, or should I toss it and forget all about it? And believe me, I'm very biased. I don't waste my time in books that don't deserve to be read. If a book deserves to be discarded, I'm not going to present it to you. It's not the place of criticism. It's the place of admiration of what the writer really wants from this book. So today we are going to present 3 books, and 3 books really are, they might not have a lot of things in common, but they have certain string that connects them all. String of melancholy and nostalgia, emotions, mixed emotions and love, and of course sometime bitterness of emptiness that might stay on your tongue after you read these books. And it's a mixture of bittersweet. And this is what I love about summer reading, is the time that you can get yourself involved in a novel, in a story, in a book, and you find yourself running through the lines and through the pages and reaching the end of the book in just no time. And then you would say and think, well, I think that the writer has invested a lot of time in writing the book in order to try to make it so attractive for you to read. And yes, these 3 writers of today have managed to squeeze in a lot of their professionalism and a lot of their talent in prose to attract our attention to what they want from these 3 books. So the 3 books of today are a book by Hisham al-Khishin, بالحبر الأزرق, or in blue ink; a book by Izzat al-Qabhawi, غربة المنازل, and I prefer to call it or translate it into the solitudes of homes; and the third and final book is Take Me to the Country of My Lover, or of My Love, or simply The Trip or the Last Journey of Zamzam by Ahmad Khairuddin. Were 3 books that carry a lot of nostalgia, a lot of emotions, and we are just going to hit away with the first book by Hisham al-Khishin, بالحبر الأزرق, or in blue ink. So yes, the world of books in this beautiful afternoon in Cairo. And the first book of today is by Hisham al-Khishin, in blue ink. And yes, we had the pleasure and honor of having Hisham al-Khishin here in our program. It was on the radio, on the telephone line, and I just contacted him about 3 or 4 days ago, and he said and he promised that he's going to come in person to our program, but hopefully after ending the summer vacation. And he is such a talented writer. He is an engineer by education and by training, and he worked and he's still working as an engineer, and his main hobby, as he would prefer to call it, not as a profession but simply a hobby that he enjoys and he loves, and information that he gathers from around the world, and then he put them brilliantly in beautiful prose in the form of novels, and never really failed our expectations. We have discussed with him happened in Berlin, and of course Le Bon Gang, and a lot of his books once on the radio, as we said in the program, maybe 1 year ago or less than 1 year ago. And it's very interesting how to see that he is carefully knitting his characters, putting them together with a very beautiful historical background that fits in the characters and connect them through a main character, and usually this character is more or less fictitious. And today he is doing the same method, but in a different way, and going where the sky is the limit, to attract our attention to a two very distinguished characters and persona of the Muhammad Ali dynasty. I'm not that fond of Muhammad Ali dynasty, of course, except for Muhammad Ali himself and for his son Ibrahim Pasha, the founder, and his distinguished, brilliant son, the founder of modern Egypt, and his distinguished, brilliant son Ibrahim Pasha. Both of them have really founded an empire and built modern Egypt, and really changed the face of Egypt, pulling it out from the dark days of the Ottoman occupation from 1516 till 1805, when Muhammad Ali has come to the reign of Egypt. When we talk about this period, we really we feel very bitter of what the Ottomans have done to Egypt, how darkness has prevailed, how the progress of Egypt has been put to an end, how Egypt has been put, as I prefer always to say, under siege. Egypt was prevented from having a breath of fresh air, from having a breath of education, of culture, and put under the tyranny of the Ottomans for long 300 years that kept the Egyptians at bay and kept them away from the control of their own fate. Yes, during the Mamluks' time they were not mastering their fate, but at least the Mamluks were the masters of their times, and that they were ruling Egypt from the citadel. Now Egypt has been ruled from Constantinople or Istanbul, and Egypt has been under the control and the tyranny of the Ottomans for a very long period of time. When Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt from 1798 till 1801, it was not really a colorful period. It was a period of occupation. No wonder whatever, and no mention of whatever the French historians would say that this was a period of enlightenment. It was not. The distinguished relation between Egypt and France is here and there to stay. But what happened from 1798 till 1801 was simple occupation, simple tyranny, and of course in two consecutive revolutions of the Egyptians against the Napoleon and his army, which was put down with extreme brute measures that led to the bombardment of Cairo and Al-Azhar itself. So Muhammad Ali, when he came to the reign, this is not the time to speak about Muhammad Ali, but we just give a mention that Muhammad Ali and his son Ibrahim were really the light in the end of the tunnel. The two people who were, through their extreme intelligence and through their sharpness and their vision, were able to build modern Egypt. And to build an empire, you need to have doctors, engineers, physicians, and everything to build an army and in the industry. And therefore Muhammad Ali invested very much in education and has changed the picture of Egypt from the backward country during the Ottoman occupation to a country that was running to catch up with the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. Unfortunately, Ibrahim Pasha died in the final days of the reign of his father, and the people who came after Muhammad Ali were not as distinguished as Muhammad Ali himself and or as his son Ibrahim Pasha. And Hisham al-Khishan has found two important, interesting characters in the history of Muhammad Ali's family, and this is the character of Mustafa Bahgat, the prince who was the second in line for the throne after Ismail Pasha, the one who was a second cousin to Ismail, and the one who Ismail intentionally went to the Topkapi and to the Turks or the Ottomans and paid his way to the Sultan and bribed him in order to change the inheritance of the Muhammad Ali family so that only the people who are coming from the descendancy of Ibrahim Pasha will rule Egypt. And therefore Mustafa Bahgat, who rightfully would have been to the reign of Egypt, was denied this chance, and unfortunately he went into self-exile, or simply was sent to exile to Istanbul, away from Egypt, in order to keep him away from Egypt and keep him away from trying to control Egypt and get his throne. And the interesting topic is his daughter. His daughter Nazli, or Princess Nazli, was a very enlightened lady that was very well bred, and Mustafa Bahgat invested very much of time and effort to properly educate her and give her the right information and the right knowledge and the books and the culture and the languages. He invested very much in educating this distinguished lady, that she has become a real master of art, of education, of sharpness, of wit and charm and wisdom, which were even more than beyond her young age at that time. She was married to one of the important characters from the Ottoman dynasty, and he went to Paris as the ambassador, and he was a minister in the Ottomans' time, and she found out that he was not that faithful to her, and at the same time she got a child from him that unfortunately died in infancy. And so there was nothing more to link her with this husband who has betrayed her, that she asked for a divorce, and instead of living in Paris or living in Constantine or Istanbul, she went back to Egypt, where she has affected from behind the scenes the cultural background of Egypt. She has made one of the first salons of art and of literature at that time, and she was of great influence in education of great men, and not to mention, of course, the greatness of Saad Zaghloul and Muhammad Farid, who was her own lawyer, and her advice to Saad Zaghloul for him to get education and to learn French and to get more into law. And unfortunately she died when she was in 1913, and she has left a great impact. And Hisham al-Khishan was so interested in the story of Nazli, father, Mustafa Bahgat, father, and of the story of Mustafa Bahgat. But to put such a story in a historical way, you can finish that maybe in 20 or 30 pages, and that would be it. But to knit two characters that will be of great interest for you to follow up and to run through the pages, well, this is what we call a genius way of writing, which I really admire Hisham al-Khishan in what he has done in it. In order to attach these strings of a real historical character of Nazli and of her father, Prince Mustafa Bahgat, he had to have a fictitious character, that is the character of the governess, or of the assistant, or of the lady in fellowship of the princess, who would stay with the princess, acting as her private secretary after being her private tutor for quite a long time, and she is British. So he carefully knitted this character and another fictitious character who belongs to the service of Her Majesty the Queen. in her intelligence service. So connecting dots and making these two fictitious characters meet together, this is what we are going to talk to you about after the break. So still listening to the World of Info. I'm coming live from Studio 3 at FM 95.4 Radio Cairo, and my name is Dr. Amr MABROUK. Dua Muhammad is at the control, and our direct line number is 257-89407. And yes, we are discussing the beautiful book of Hisham al-Khishin in blue ink, and we have talked about this skeleton, or the main skeleton of the plot, that is to describe the life and the time of Princess Nazli, the daughter of the famous prince who legally and legitimately could be considered the crown prince to Khedive Ismail, and he was denied this right by the agreement that Ismail did with the Sultan of the Ottomans, and denying the right of ruling for Mustafa Bahgat, who is not from the direct descendancy of Ibrahim Pasha. So this is the story, but what is knitting the story together is the two fictitious characters that Hisham al-Khishin has really made together and to build together, for the idea that all these rich people, all these royal families usually should have a governess and should have ladies serving the ladies, and who are highly educated. And here we are talking about Lydia Stone, the lady who is lady in waiting for the Princess Nazli, who met her in the 60s of the 19th century when she was in exile with her father in Istanbul, and stayed with her for a very long period of time until even her death. And the periods that she went back to the UK, it's just very short periods of time, but she preferred always to stay back in Egypt, and that she had contact with the secret service of the Foreign Service of the UK, giving them and sending them reports and information. But when we talk about Lydia Stone, we have to tell you the story of love. And yes, why Lydia Stone decided to leave the UK? She was running away from a love story, a desperate love story that she had once with a very rich man who maybe deceived her, and she had an affair with him and had a child, and this child she was forced to live in a foster home, and she fled the country because of love. And what people do because of love is really very strange, how they would desert the areas that they found the true love in when they feel betrayed or wounded. And she felt betrayed and wounded, and therefore she left the whole of Great Britain and went to have this job as a governess or a lady in waiting for Princess Nazli in Istanbul. And she has written a lot of letters, and we find out that all these letters were not addressed to her first love, or the man who left her and didn't try to get married to her because she is not from the same class like him. And all these letters were addressed to her son. So she thought that this son, if he might be alive, nobody knows, that he deserves to read her story. And this was another love that she had in her life. So this is the second love that she was having. The third love that this lady Lydia had in her life was as she was serving the Princess Nazli, she met one of the loyal slaves, a man coming from Africa with a very great pride, and a proud man who was working for the service of the Prince Mustafa Fadil. And even when after he died, and Nazli decided to give him his freedom and to treat him not as a slave but as a free man, he came back and said, "I want to stay in your service like I served your father." She admired this man who was very cultured and educated, and he was acting not just as a servant or as a slave for Prince Mustafa Bahgat, but he was serving him in great honor and grace, and therefore he was received highly by Lydia, who, strange enough, has fallen in love with him. So we find the metamorphosis of Lydia Stone. from loving a man of a higher stature, and then loving a man who was a slave, but yet she found out that this slave has more integrity and greatness and kindness, much more than the rich man that she has fallen for him in her first years, and the one who betrayed her and refused to get married to her. So as we go through these pages, we find that love is what is knitting the relation between all the characters of this novel. And although that the main characters, that is of Nazli and of her father, which we unfortunately lose in the beginning of in the first quarter of the novel because of his death, we can find that what's knitting these characters and what's bringing these characters together is love. Whether this love is an unconditioned love for your child, or for the love of your life that you might meet by coincidence and in different situations, and at the same time the love of friends and the love of friendship and the love of education. So what was the whole plot of Hisham al-Khishin in Blue Ink together, or bringing it together, was the word love, which makes the story goes round until the final pages, in spite of its role in giving us and delivering to us valuable information of a distinguished princess that lived in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, who has really affected the cultural background of the Egyptian society, of the Egyptian higher society, and her great effect on important politicians, whether this was Muhammad Farid, the famous leader, or the Saad Zaghlul himself, who really admired her and received from her words of wisdom. And yes, words of wisdom is what we get out of the new novel of Hisham al-Khishin, بالحبر الأزرق, or in Blue Ink. So we're still coming live from World of Info, and I promise you, and as Mr. Hisham al-Khishin has promised us, that he will come specially to our program, perhaps in late September, to discuss with us his last novel. But just I read this novel and I felt very enthusiastic to give you an idea about the plot and the idea and about the love that goes through the pages of this beautiful novel. Stay tuned with us in World of Info and World of Books to talk about more books and more sentimental and nostalgic mood that we are living in this hot afternoon in Cairo. We're listening to the World of Info and the World of Books, and the second book today is على بلد المحبوب, رحلة زمزم الأخيرة by Ahmad خير الدين, or To the Country of My Loved One, The Last Journey of Zamzam. Well, this is a real nostalgic book. And yes, we are in the summer, a lot of nostalgia, a lot of sea, and a lot of breeze, fresh breeze from the sea, and of course beautiful weather on the sea will always make you loving the idea of reading books of nostalgia. And yes, it's a sentimental book, and it's a book that was written by chance. Ahmad Khairuddin is one of the bloggers, and he is very much interested in writing and getting more into knowledge and information, and he's currently living now in the United States of America. And he went to the Congress Library and found, as he was searching for some information from the Second World War or Egyptian journals, and suddenly he found a treasure of information talking about an Egyptian ship. Yes, a ship, a passenger ship that was on a trip from Alexandria through the Suez Canal around Africa, going to Brazil and then to New York to deliver certain things, and coming back from its way from New York back to Alexandria through the same route, with members of the ship, or workers from the ship. The crew, they are about 120. The captain is British, and most of the officers are either Egyptians, or few of them are Greeks or British, and American passengers, and some the cargo was food and certain ambulance cars and things like that, not really any army cars or weapons. And at that time the United States of America was still neutral. And as the ship was going from New York back to Cairo, and the midway in the Atlantic as it was going towards Africa, a German warship, battleship, saw the ship and decided to sink it, and fired on it without any reason, and sinking this ship. Strange enough that all of the people on board of the Zamzam boat survived the attack, and they were all transferred to the Atlantis, which is the German ship that sank their ship. And then later on they were transferred to another German ship called Tristan. And instead of putting them all in a neutral boat, they were driven to a port in the French occupied France, where they were put as prisoners of war. The Americans who were on board of this ship, including families of missionaries and Americans, civilians, they were given the permission to leave and to go through the Red Cross to Spain and then to Portugal and back to the United States. Unfortunately, the Egyptian crew were forced to stay behind as prisoners of war, and they stayed till 1944, and the idea for keeping them as prisoners of war in Germany was to try to convince the Egyptian government, which has already taken a lot of German citizens in Cairo, who were living in Cairo, as prisoners of war. So Germany decided to try to pull some strings to force the Egyptian government to release these the German prisoners in return for leaving the Egyptians. The Egyptians stayed for 3 difficult years end of 1944, where the ship was sunk in 1941 before Pearl Harbor, and then in 1944 they were released and sent through a long way home through Turkey, which was neutral, and went back to Egypt. Those who survived, and those 2 or 3 of them who died in the prisoner of war camp, and few else who stayed around, who were injured, who couldn't be transferred from the Atlantis war ship to Dresden. They perished, I think, with the Atlantis, which was later on sunk by the British Navy. So this is a story. How far is the story related to the Egyptians? How many of these Egyptians who didn't speak the English language were able to tell their real story when they went back home? Unfortunately, there are very few. Some of them were so shell-shocked that the ones who understood English and spoke and learned German and French, especially the Navy officers, the young Navy officers who were there, preferred not to talk about this dim period of time as prisoners of war in Germany. And I find that very interesting, because people who stay as prisoners of war, usually the period is so traumatic to themselves that they would like hardly to try to forget it. They would hardly like to share the information with their families or their loved ones. I myself had this experience because my father was a prisoner of war back in 1956, before I was born, as the commander of a medical hospital, of a military hospital, and he was taken as a prisoner of war for 3 months in Atlit, the famous prisoner of war camp in Israel. And he stayed there for 3 months. And all through my life with my dad, since I was born until he died, I tried to convince him to tell me the story, and he would always say, "I will tell you later." And under severe pressure of mine, he simply gave me some scattered information about these 3 terrible months that he stayed as a prisoner of war. He was not scrutinized, or he was not physically abused, but simply the idea that a free man or a physician is forced to stay behind bars is very insulting to the thinking and the brains of prisoners of war. The minds of these prisoners of war stayed traumatic for all whatever their experience was. And yes, the members of the crew who were not taken up as they came back in 1944 to Egypt, they were not really taken up as heroes when they arrived to Egypt. At that period of time, there were a lot of incidents that were happening in the history of Egypt. There was the government of Mustafa Nahas was thrown in power, and there was a power vacuum, and there was the killing or the assassination of Lord Moyne. So only few lines came out on the newspapers telling that the crew of Zamzam are finally repatriated. So this period of time remains as hard times. The Americans who were members or passengers were more lucky than the Egyptians, is that they had a journalist with them and a cameraman who was traveling on board of Zamzam, and he was given the golden chance to write all the story about this, the sinking of the ship, their trip on board of Dresden to the French port, and their trip to Portugal and Spain when they were released there and went back home. They kept a Brothers in Arms association that included all of the Americans who survived this incident, and they stayed all this time linked together and sharing the photographs that reached the hands of the Americans, even when the Germans sent them these photographs. So there was a brotherhood of Zamzam that included the Americans, but unfortunately it didn't include the Egyptian crew. So it was up to Ahmad Khairuddin, the writer, to try to link. He approached the descendants of the American Brotherhood of Zamzam in order to get from them information. And he met a couple of survivors who were still alive in the 2019 and 2017, as he has discovered that in the Congress Library. And he went to the families of the Egyptian Navy officers who were the third officer of the ship. And the son of him told him that my father, who was a very enlightened man, who learned a lot of languages as a prisoner of war, English, French and German, and he refused always to talk about this period, even when they pressed him hard to talk about it. The same with all the experience of prisoners of war. And as we see in the lines of the story, we find that one of the Navy cadets, on his way to New York, on the first way of the trip, he had some illness, so he was left in the port in Brazil. And as he was waiting for the ship to come back to collect him from New York, he has fallen in love with a Brazilian girl, and he even got engaged to her. But he was forced to leave her and go on board of the ship in her doomed trip. And he survived, and he stayed as a prisoner of war later on. And unfortunately, the story doesn't tell us what happened to this gentleman, this love story. Did he go ever back to Brazil and get married to his fiancée that he left her in 1941? Was she still there in 1944 or 45 when he was released? Where did he go after the war? This Ahmad Khairuddin failed to identify where and what happened to this gentleman. Well, the novel brings to you a lot of nostalgia, brings you a lot of things, how fate changes the lives of people, how a wrong turn of a ship or a mast of a ship from one direction to another could put it in the direct hands of fate, how lives of people would change and would never come back to where it was after such a drastic incidents that happened. And the miracle that happened, that a lot of Egyptians would claim it happened because the name of the boat was called Zamzam, that every single passenger and crew member survived the incident and the sinking of the boat, which is very rare to occur in the middle of the Atlantic. So, take me to the country of my loved, or my love. The final journey of Zamzam is a great effort made by Ahmad Khairuddin to connect the dots of a story, of a humane story, of people who were trapped in a ship in the middle of war, and a civilian ship carrying a civilian flag of a neutral country, and yet was exposed to sinking of it with total, what we call, cold-blooded way of sinking, in spite of the flag that was there. Anyway, a story that deserves to be read, a story that deserves to be told, and a lot of unanswered questions that simply died with the death of the heroes of this unfinished story of Take Me to the Country of My Love. رحلة زمزم الأخيرة by Ahmad Khairuddin. Stay tuned with us to the final book of this afternoon from the world of books in the world of info. So we're still listening to the world of books, the world of info, and yes, this was She by Charles Aznavour. Interesting. Well, going again with nostalgia, the third and final book of today is by Azzat al-Qamhawi, غربة المنازل, or The Solitude of Homes. Well, this is an interesting book. It's he has said that this is a novel, but I find that it's a group of short stories that are linked together as we go through reading the parts of the book to find out that all these characters, in spite of the fact that they are not relatives and they are not friends, most of them, yet they are living in the same building. And where this building is, it's just somewhere in Cairo. Probably in a downtown place in Cairo, because it's an old building. Probably it has a lot of characters and a lot of people going around, and probably every story tells us something about a hidden emotion, about a nostalgic way of thinking, and it tells us a lot about the feeling of Egyptians and Cairenes especially during the times and the days of Corona. Yes, it's a new novel, or it's a new strand of short stories that has been written in the year 2020. A year which will definitely affect the whole way of writing of novels and the stories, because it was involved in mentioning the story of people who are living in the times of Corona. How people have dealt in a different way than they used to deal with books or whatever. And as we see, we can find that it's simply telling us stories of love. How people love each other, how people love brings them together, how people find their eternal love simply and suddenly, how people present sacrifices just for the sake of love. Love is not just the love between a man and a woman to have an affair, but love could be the fact that brings a person who has been living abroad for many long time and many years to buy an apartment in the building that his elder brother is living in, just to have a look every day and see his brother who was living in solitude, especially after losing his wife. And the feeling, the great feeling of emptiness that he feels when his brother simply dies from natural causes, and for a day or two he doesn't know that his brother was dead, in spite of the fact that they're living in the same building. The whole story of nostalgia brings us again about a man who has fallen in a great love affair with his secretary or his companion or his lady or his housekeeper, that she stayed with him for the whole of her life, maybe 30 or 40 years, in the same apartment, and not having a physical relation with him except once in such a very long period of time. and yet this once was quite enough for him to beg her for getting married to him, and she never accepted. And of course, the story of a lady who immigrated to the United States and stayed there until her husband, and she and her husband stayed and worked there for all their lives. And when her husband died, she felt that she was very lonely, and she felt the great solitude and the great desertion, and decided to come back to the same building where her parents used to live in order to take care of the cemetery, of the family cemetery, in order to transfer her husband from where he's buried in the States back to be buried here in Egypt in this cemetery. And suddenly she discovered that this cemetery has been demolished because it's been involved in widening of one of the routes of Cairo. So she leaves back. So what brings us together? What brings us to the same place? And how far are we feeling lonely or happy in life? And what Corona has done to us, and how we have changed through the days and the years. What type of physical context when people used to get in contact with each other or play with the kids or children, and suddenly they find themselves not trying to approach others in physical contact. And how the fact that Corona has made us stop going to work, and the people who have been always taking very good care of the way that they were wearing their clothes, or having a shaved beard, and having a lot of cologne as they are leaving their homes every day for work, and suddenly you find them not interested anymore to leave the walls of the building. So Corona made them live in solitude, and Corona made them feel the whole width and the whole breadth of living in solitude. As we see the pages, and we can see the hope with the same man who came to buy an apartment in the building like his brother, and after losing his brother, he has nothing to do every day except walking around in a nearby garden, where he met a lady who has been always going and taking her dog around with her. So suddenly they get attracted, because this is the only place where during this curfew time that they can spend outside their homes. And a friendship can progress to love, and a relation that comes out like a flower that blooms from the period of darkness of Corona. We can find the happiness of these two semi-old couple getting married to each other in spite of the fact and in spite of the Corona. So the solitude of homes brings us to a lot of information and a lot of desires to share with you the emotions and the nostalgia. After the break, more about the solitude of homes. So as we are leaving Azad al-Qamhawi in his solitude of homes, we have to mention that in spite of despair, and in spite of dark days of Corona, and in spite of the daymares, should we say daymares, not nightmares, because what we are feeling at the times of Corona is that it was a continuous nightmare, that we were completely awake and seeing the despair of not able to leave our homes, and the danger of the illness and the disease that has taken the loved ones, and the fear from the disease has put a great brunt or a great weight on the shoulders of us and of the characters of Azad al-Qamhawi in the solitude of homes. But in the middle of despair, there is always hope. And hope is what brings us together. And hope is the only thing that makes people live and have faith. So today was the world of books, coming from the world of info. We had the presentation of 3 beautiful books: Hisham al-Khishin bil-Hibr al-Azraq, or In Blue Ink, Take Me to the Country of My Loved, رحلة زمزم الأخيرة The Final Journey of Zamzam by أحمد خير الدين. And finally, last but not least, غربة المنازل or The Solitude of Homes by عزت القمحاوي. May I wish you a very pleasant weekend in Cairo and the whole of Egypt. Enjoy reading because it brings a lot of beautiful emotions and nostalgia to our lives. My name is Dr. Amr MABROUK. Dua Muhammad was at the control. Today was the world of info, and today was the world of books. See you next Thursday, same time, same station. Stay safe.